Some unexpected news, not necessarily shocking news from Ohio State today. We showed up for a press conference with Gene Smith, expecting to talk to him about Big Ten expansion and a bunch of topics like that. And he did talk about all those things after announcing he will retire next June. In June 2024 will be the end of his what will be then 19-year tenure as Ohio State's athletic director. And he's obviously, over that time, over those 2 decades, as he's become the longest tenured AD in the Big Ten right now, become a big voice, a very influential person across college sports, but has also overseen a time of change here with Ohio State football. Includes the 2014 national championship and includes the way that Urban Meyer kind of took this program to another level. So, Stephen, as you look ahead, Ohio State, Gene says they're not going to begin to look for his successor until Ohio State has a president in place. That process is continuing. We don't expect it to drag on many, many more months, but that's going to be 2 very influential decisions that are ahead of Ohio State as an institution here in the next few months. As it relates just to Ohio State football, how crucial do you think getting the right successor for Gene Smith is?
I think some of it depends on how long you think Ryan Day is going to be the head coach here, because that's the most important thing. Is Gene Smith has made the last 2 Ohio State football hires, and just to plug a former pod from our former coworker who was there, the last pod I did with Doug LeMaurice was about Ohio State threats, and both of us agreed that one of the threats was Ryan Day leaving at a time when Gene Smith was no longer the athletic director. Because now you're putting yourself in a situation where we don't know if the next athletic director is going to be good at hiring folk. We don't know that. Gene Smith's got a pretty quality track record here amongst multiple sports of making good hires. So that's part A of my answer. Part B is, how does it change the working dynamic between head coach and athletic director? We're talking about a bunch of new stuff, right? We're talking expansion. We're talking NIL. We're talking all the 12-team playoff. How does that athletic director approach some of these things? And does it maybe there are things Ryan Day wanted to do that Gene Smith wasn't for. Maybe there are things Gene Smith wanted to do that Ryan Day wasn't for. So how does that dynamic work as well? So it really just boils down to those 2 things. How does that relationship form once that new AD is picked? But then also, what happens when Ryan Day is no longer the head coach and he has to make a head coach hire?
Obviously, a lot of things going on in college sports right now. Gene Smith said those were not really a factor in why he's deciding to step away. In fact, he said he actually stayed on longer than he might have originally, because to kind of help Ohio State through what is a lot of, whatever word you want to use, transition, upheaval. You might be more closer to the second of those terms, Andrew. But obviously those things are going to keep going on. Like, there's going to still be conference expansion. There's still going to a lot of issues around name, image, and likeness that have to be handled, around just Ohio State and how it is funding its athletic programs and things like that. And how crucial do you think some sort of football background? Gene Smith played college football. He played at Notre Dame. I don't know if you knew that. He played college football and was very heavily involved at a national level with big changes that were happening with that sport specifically. Do you think football background, or at least an athletic director who has come from a place where he's had to do what Steven's talking about, maybe make a big football hire, consider football at the highest levels, is that crucial? Is that almost like a prerequisite for who you're hiring for this job?
I think it has to be, right? I mean, you talk about kind of one of the things that Gene said today was that the structure of college football he thinks should change. He thinks that, FBS football should separate, and you've kind of heard that a lot over the last couple of days, couple of weeks with Oregon and Washington changing that, hey, maybe we don't need to have Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten for everything. Maybe it can just be a football conference. Maybe we can do that. I mean, if you're going to do all of these things, I mean, you talked about NIL, the portal, all these all the craziness that's happening in college football. There's never, it feels like a smooth time to join college athletics. There's never a relatively easy time to join it. There's always something going on. But when you talk about football as it relates to, the college football landscape, it's obviously the moneymaker. You got to have something there, because that's how all these that's why Oregon and Washington are joining the Big Ten. That's why USC and UCLA are joining the Big Ten. That's it. That's all you got to boil it down to. There's nothing else there. So you've got to have something there. You've got to have an understanding of what football means to these programs, but also what football means to, the rest of the country, because this is going to shape college athletics, whether or not it stays on the same kind of trajectory that it's going on, where all these conferences stay together or all these conferences change. Football is going to have the biggest part in that. So you've got to have some kind of background, because that's who you're going to be negotiating with.
So, just to let people know, athletic director searches tend to not go like football searches, which happen to over a span of weeks usually. Athletic directors, this is going to take a while. It's at the president level. It's very involved, and like we just said, Ohio State doesn't have a president. But names you're going to hear, you're already hearing, I'm sure. UCLA's Martin Jarmond, Washington State's Patrick Chun, Pittsburgh's Heather Like, Diana Sabow, who just left the Big Ten, had been a deputy AD here, was deputy commissioner there, is going to Utah State. Ben Jay, who's with the Big West. Like, there's a lot of names that are all people who came up through the Gene Smith tree. They're all people who he kind of helped cultivate and mentor and lead them into athletic administration positions at other places, some of them big places like I just named. But that list is not going to stop there. I think a place like Ohio State, as much as it likes that background probably, and the familiarity would be nice, you're going to go out and try to hire the best athletic director possible. So it's probably going to be it will be a big name that comes out maybe next spring when this all wraps up. And a lot of people are going to be watching to see who Ohio State hires, because it is a huge, huge decision as to how the Big Ten moves forward and the influence Ohio State has there, and how all of college sports is going to change as well. A lot more about this on an emergency episode of Buckeye Talk on the pod. If you haven't found that, go find it wherever you can find podcasts, and get the text 614-350-3315. That's where we were first sending out news of this development this morning from Buckeye Talk.